G'day, my name's Charles, and I'm going to be talking to you today about how history, and more importantly how teaching historical skills, can actually help our students make sense of this brave new world that they find themselves in. And this stems from the fact that, like many teachers for the past 2 months, I've had to move a lot of my learning online, and this was a process which I found very confronting, challenging, and a bit daunting in many ways. And I thought, if I was feeling challenged, if I was feeling a bit apprehensive about this, imagine what my students must be feeling. And I was curious to find out what my students thought about this whole situation and how they were coping with this massive change in their lifestyles. And I also wanted them to realize that history was a fantastic way of helping them to make sense of what was happening, and that history simply wasn't a subject that was involved with the study of the past, but that in studying the past we gain a better understanding about why we are where we are today, and that the decisions that we make today based on our knowledge of the past is going to inform our future, and that decisions that they made today was going to determine their future. So we started off, we looked at 3 skills that we wanted to teach the students. First one was, I wanted to teach them how to be critical analytical thinkers and how to be critical consumers of information. Secondly, I wanted them to be able to ask relevant questions. And thirdly, I wanted them to be able to construct arguments based on evidence rather than hearsay. The reason that I picked these 3 was because these 3 skills can be of use in any profession. So no matter whether they decided to become a street sweeper or a plumber or a carpenter or a doctor or a lawyer or even an astronaut, these skills would be handy in all of those professions. And that history and the historical skills that we learn are just as relevant as the skills you learn in English, maths and science. So how did I go about doing this? Well, the first activity that we did was, or the first challenge that we faced was getting students to ask relevant questions. Our students had no problem asking questions, but getting them to ask relevant questions and to answer those questions was a bit of a challenge. So the first thing we did was I got my students to email me a question about anything. Okay. And what I would do was I would then post these questions anonymously on a Google Classroom. And the first thing I asked my students to do once I'd done this was I said, log onto the Google Classroom, and I said, look at these questions and tell me what you think. So they did. And we had a discussion around what was a good question, what was a bad question. This was done via Zoom. And then after this Zoom session that we had, something quite interesting started to happen, because suddenly people were logging onto the Google Classroom, and they were obviously looking at their questions, and they would then email me and they say, can I change my question? So I said, fine, that's not a problem. And what they were doing was they were logging onto Google Classrooms, they were looking at some of the questions, and they were then looking at their questions and thinking, hey, wait a minute, maybe I could make my question better. They were taking it away, they were refining their question, they were tweaking it a bit, and then they were resubmitting it. And in some cases, they did this up to about 3 or 4 times. So this whole idea of using Google Classrooms encouraged these students to work collaboratively with each other. Granted, not all the students did this. I mean, it didn't work for every single student, but for the majority of students, this collaborative aspect actually worked quite well. So once we got them to the point where they were capable of constructing a a question which was well thought out, and they were comfortable with putting their questions out there. I then divided the class into 2 groups, and I paired them up. And each pair got a question. And the second activity was designed to introduce them to research skills, very basic research skills. So we gave them each a question, and we said to them, right, between the 2 of you, you have to find 3 sources which will help someone answer this question. And this was probably the most problematic of the 3 exercises that we did, because these students were getting a lot of their information from social media, and a lot of the information that they were posting was not actually relevant to answering the question, and it contained a lot of misinformation. And some of the stuff they were posting were just downright conspiracy theories. And so what we had to do was we had to teach these students how to analyze sources and how to analyze them for their reliability and for their usefulness. And the way we did this was we did what we call claims testing with them. And we gave them 4 criteria in which to analyze a source. So it created a basic framework for them to analyze sources. And the way it works is this. So the first claims test is intuition. So what is your gut instinct? So when you read the article, what is your gut instinct? Is it reliable? Is it not? Secondly, we used logic. And so we said to them, like, logically, do you think this makes sense? In your mind, do you think that this is a reliable article? Thirdly, we used evidence. So does the article make use of any evidence? Does it link to other articles? Does it make reference to other articles or historical studies or archaeological reports or scientific reports? Lastly, we looked at authority. So is the person who's writing this report, is it their opinion? Is it, are they actually qualified to write this article? Do they have any professional qualifications? And how reliable are they? How reliable is the author of this particular source? And this took a while to get. It took a while for the kids to get their heads around this, but once they did get their heads around this, they were then able to quite quickly determine whether a source was reliable or not. So then what we did was we now had, each group had a Google Doc which had a question and 3 sources. We then swapped these questions and sources around between the groups, and each group got to look at someone else's sources, and they got to look at the comments that these, that the first group had made. And they applied claims testings to these sources. And by the end of it, so this took about a week or so to achieve, and by the end of it, they were actually quite, adept at working out what constituted a reliable source and what constituted an unreliable source. The last activity that we did, which was to cement this in their heads, was what we call Tweet of the Week. And this is where they hunted through social media, and they would find a tweet, or they would find a social media post of some sort, and they would then post it up on Google Classrooms, and everyone, the entire class, would have a go at this and work out whether it was a reliable source or not, and why it was not reliable, and they got to have their say. We also had a few Zoom sessions in between, where which created quite rich discussions amongst the students as to the various sources they looked up, and they got to discuss these sources within a group. And it was quite interesting to see how their skills had developed since the first week in which we started this. And the last activity that we did was an activity which encouraged them to argue their point using evidence. So we did this in the form of a debate, and we'd give each group a topic. And a lot of this was based on stuff we got from social media, tweets. Like Twitter was a goldmine for this sort of stuff. And we'd give them each a tweet, and we'd get them to argue as to why they thought that this tweet or this article or this social media post was reliable or not. And it was quite interesting to watch their skills develop, because at first they simply said, well, this is bogus because this guy's an idiot. I said, well, you can't really say that. You need to have evidence. You need to back up your argument with evidence. So then they'd go away, and then in some respects they'd come up with they'd look for an article which refuted what this person was saying in their tweet, and this developed their argumentative skills, and it made them argue a lot more coherently, and got them into the habit of using evidence to back up their arguments, and not simply argue for the sake of arguing. As I said, this whole process took about a month or so to refine and to tweak. It's still a bit of a work in process, but hopefully it's given you some indication as to how you can use history and historical skills to inspire students and to encourage them to think historically, and in doing so make them more informed more informed citizens, and hopefully encourage them to make more intelligent decisions regarding their future, and hopefully what they're going to do in the future. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.